Thank you all for joining us today for our webinar on campaign planning and leveraging data across strategy and audience development and audience strategy and measurement. Today for our webinar we have Rosey Sutton, who has joined us from Just Global, who is it's a global, maybe the global B2B marketing agency. So before we get into the agenda and housekeeping, Rosey, would you please introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Rosey Sutton. I oversee the omni-channel programmatic team at Just Global. In my role, I'm accountable for programmatic strategy, optimization, and execution across all of our in-house platforms. So I work really closely with all of our internal teams, strategy team, coming up with audiences, and then also working closely with our analytics team to refine our measurement plans and drive ABM for our clients.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. And also, I should have introduced myself. My name is Hsiaolei. I'm on the customer success group here with Bombora, and also do a lot of work with our agency partners and our enterprise customers and even partners within our cooperative. So we'll just do a really quick bit of housekeeping while we get into the agenda. So first off, the webinar is recorded. So just everybody, please take note of that. We do have a Q&A in the Zoom. You should be able to see that Q&A link. There's also a webinar chat if you have questions. We'll have time at the end for any of those that may come up, so don't hesitate to put those in. I think that's it for housekeeping. Is there anything else, Shalane? That note?
You hit them all.
Okay, perfect. I remember two things, so I did my job. All right, perfect. So let's get into the agenda. So we're going to talk about how you can leverage data to do some campaign strategy, to think about how to leverage content, how to do creative based on data, of course, that actual audience creation side, and then get into a little bit of measurement. So first, we'll get into the strategy side. So how can we first start by leveraging this data to plan our campaigns? So, we know that like when we're going to plan some advertising, we know typically the kind of people that we want to hit and serve our ads to. But Bombora can also tell us not just, hey, of course, I'm trying to reach large companies. I'm trying to reach companies that are interested in my solutions. But Bombora can actually tell you how many of those companies are actively researching your solutions in the current time period, right? The last 90 days, the last 30 days, whatever time period we have. And so what we actually have on the screen is a view from one of our dashboards that can actually tell you, and my example here is actually Bombora. So as we think about how we service the marketing, like marketing capabilities for our customers, we actually want to take a look at how many companies are even in market right now in the last quarter for any of our solutions. And so that's what this data can start to tell us. It can tell us, first off, that there's 37,000 companies that have been researching this in the last time period, and that is filtered on the left here to our ideal customer profile, so large companies. We can start to see the breakdown by industry. And even here on the right, we can see, how far along in the research journey are these accounts, right? Are they just starting to look at different solutions around content or advertising, or are they pretty far along? Are they in depth? And that can just help inform, what kind of campaign I want to run. Am I thinking more top funnel, maybe more branding, demand generation, or am I in lead generation stage, and I need to think about how do I convert and win over these accounts. So that's just some of the data that we provide. I'd like to pass it over to Rosey to help us understand how you actually make this work.
Yeah, so typically we do pull these types of reports at the beginning of the planning process, and the way we like to look at this is first we look at the intent by stage, right? Because we do want to always try to break up our audience by where they are on the funnel, because every platform, every tactic is, different. And so you want to make sure that you're aligning your tactics and your strategy with the right stage of the funnel. So that's kind of the first step that we take there. And then when thinking about these different industries, a lot of times what we like to do is, think about creative, because you're going to message differently to different people in different industries, right? You want to make sure that you're getting the message to the right person at the right time. So the categories or industries can really help us to hone in that creative messaging and make sure that it's appropriate with that stage of the journey as well. And then we look at categories as well. A lot of times with categories, we want to make sure that we are looking at the right categories for the customer. So we'll work really closely with our clients and ensure that they are giving us the topics that are or categories that are most important to them, so that then once we do activate, we can also measure how the categories have changed.
So when we're looking at categories, and let's think about ourselves as a brand now, what is a category to one of your customers? Like in this example that we're looking at, this is sort of areas of marketing that Bombora, can sort of service. Is that the same for you when you're explaining categories to your customer?
Well, for us, it may be different, right? We have a lot of tech clients. So it could be like cloud-based architecture, something like that, multi-cloud. A lot of times we're looking at categories that to the layman may not mean anything, but that are very important to the client. So because tech can be so detailed and in the weeds, it's really important to get that, agreement on the right categories.
Right. So it's typically associated with like I don't really understand cloud architecture either, but is it associated with like their product line or their
Exactly.
business unit?
Exactly.
Okay, cool.
Or business, it could be associated with business unit as well.
Okay, perfect. I just want to make sure that I'm like understanding
Yeah.
the full picture. That's great. Perfect. So that's a great place to start, right? And like let's try to see how big the market is. How can we start to segment this universe? And we also have another data set that we think is really relevant at this stage in campaign planning, and that's actually to look at research over time. I know this graph is really busy, so just to explain it, all of these lines are those same categories we saw before. So it was research around content, research around events, advertising, and lead generation. And that's what the wavy lines are. And then the solid lines is the trend line. So when we look at this graph and we're looking at how is research taking place over the course of a year, when you look at the trend line, those solid lines, you can actually see for lead generation, it's pretty flat. Around the year, people are sort of probably always, everybody needs leads all the time. So that makes sense. Events, advertising, those are also pretty flat, even though you could probably see there's some, like I think with events, that's the yellow bar in the back. Right, we can see a lot of that in the winter, right? So it's probably around a lot of times we were doing the annual planning because events you sort of have to sign up early. But the blue line here, content, we can see that one's actually has grown the most. We can see a big peak of it in the summer. So when we're thinking about campaign planning, this can really help us inform around maybe seasonality, right? If there are high volume research periods, then if the budget that we had for a low volume time is not going to do the same work as a high volume time. So that's sort of how we read this. But Rosey, what would you say? What's your take on this?
Yeah, I would say I would read this very similarly. I think where this can be especially valuable is if you have, especially the bull market that we're in, if you have a client or advertiser that has limited budget, or they just want to make sure their budget is working as efficiently as possible, then this is an amazing tool to make sure that you can really capture those moments in time when the user is incredibly engaged. So I know we recently did this for a client that didn't have a huge budget. And I think it's just a great way to look at the data. Another thing that I would be curious about is does content always follow that seasonality line? Or in the previous year, was content more flat, and it's just a topic that is really surging right now, because I know I personally have been reading a lot about content marketing in the trades. So I feel like it's kind of a newer topic that's really been surging lately.
Yeah, we certainly can do that. We could just expand this more. So for anybody that is interested, that's definitely how we can leverage these tools. And I think that's actually a great segue to think, when we can see this kind of increase, right? What's behind it, and then how can we best leverage it? So let's actually use this as a great pivot. Thank you. Segue to our next section, which is actually all about the content and the creative. So I'm just going to jump ahead to my next slide. It's almost like I had this planned. What we're looking at now is the amount of research, the number of companies that are signaling intent on those different categories again. And now we're comparing them to the last 90 days to the previous 90 days. So we saw the big peak in the summer. I know it's still the summer, but it's already rainy here. So we did see a big peak, and that growth was actually 34%. So it's a pretty big growth for content. And the real question's like, well, first off, that's interesting to know, but when I make creative, it's not the title will not just be content marketing, so like what is driving that? And how do we get into more details? And so on the right image, you can actually see the topics by within the category. So content personalization is actually the biggest driver of that. It's grown tenfold in the last 90 days, research around that. So is this the kind of data that you think is helpful to sort of do that kind of planning? Rosey, how would you leverage this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I kind of talked about this briefly earlier, but this is something we work with our clients on, to choose topics that we can then report out on. So I just did a QBR for a client where we took, and I'll show some slides about it later, but where we took their topics, and then we were able to see a % of change on that topic research, which after being in market for a few months, it's just a great metric to be able to share. And then also, kind of as you said, really getting down to the nitty gritty, just talking about content marketing doesn't really tell you that much, but when you get into the subcategories of content personalization, then to me, that's a topic that you could easily take a spin on with creative. And then similarly, maybe avoid the bottom topics in creative.
Right. It's actually, I think, really helpful to know what to not focus on. I think about how did we do this before this data was available? And I mean, how much are we influenced by just like, well, my boss really likes that,
Right. Yeah, for
So,
sure. I mean, you always need to start with intelligence, right?
Yeah.
The account and the audience, you get clarity on them when you're looking at this type of data first.
Absolutely. Earlier, you had mentioned when you were thinking about segmenting, you were looking at that funnel stage and the industry, because you want to make sure that what you're pushing out, like the creative, is really relevant. So do you do this where you sort of identify the topics by industry or by stage as your filters too, or do you use this sort of more generally?
We use this more generally. I would say the funnel stage we use more often, right? Like planning that, right? Because that insight is going to inform our strategy, right? So we want to make sure that we're, we have different tactics for each stage. Because I think a lot of clients forget about the middle of the funnel. Either, they're really hyper focused on the top of the funnel or hyper focused on the bottom of the funnel. And so it's really important to remember that nurture stage and to really think about that. Because if you send a user straight to a gated landing page and they're not ready, they haven't done the research yet, then they're probably going to bounce.
Yeah. And you paid a lot for that bounce, right? You did all the work.
Exactly. And then a lot of times it gets blamed on either the platform or, the creative, but it's really about the entire user journey and
Yeah.
making sure that your audience is primed.
Yeah. That's actually another great segue. Thank you. We actually did not prepare this in this way, but it's working out really well. So when we think about content and research, what this graph is actually the number of times we can see a spike at an account on each different category. So as an account is researching content marketing, we can actually see that they spike on average 13 times over the course of 90 days, and that's across a lot of different marketing, content marketing topics, the content personalization amongst others. But that's really about the nurturing, right? It's not just about, oh great, so this is the creative that we should be leveraging, let's push this out, and if they land, high five, we're done, right? This is a journey, especially in B2B. And thinking about, you don't want to win one interaction, you want to win 13 interactions, right? They're going to research this 13 times. I want to influence that each time. So hopefully this data, I think, helps like sort of get at like the journey does vary by product, but it is this journey certainly, and it is not about just one. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree 100%. I also think it's important to think about where you're putting the message, right? Because as users, our journeys are changing every day because we're curating our experience now, right? Between streaming and podcasts and, and online, just website advertising, like we are curating that experience. So it's really important to be omni-channel. You want to make sure that you are at least driving with a few channels. What we see a lot of success with is, at least a combination of two channels. You want to, if you have video, you want to make sure that you're retargeting people who've completed the entire video. So I think that, and same with audio podcasting. So I think it is really important too, to try to think about channels that are going to drive that message home, that are going to help you increase your frequency and really drive that nurture. So not just the content, but like where are we putting the content too?
Yeah, I think that's so important because I think a lot of research around this sort of engagement is so consumer focused, right? Like we can see how much time people spend on TikTok and second screening while watching a television show. You're also on your phone. But thinking about that in the business context, I think is so relevant because, absolutely, you can and should reach business professionals at home because we all work from home. I think all three of us here are working from home right now. And it's just about the right context, the right time, and stitching that all together into an experience. I think it's so interesting that you bring it up. And I think it's one of the hardest and most interesting things about your job, honestly.
Yeah. And I think it's because there's places sometimes now where I'm seeing B2B messages where I think, oh, why am I seeing this on Hulu? But they're catching me by surprise. And so I'm remembering it.
Yeah.
And I think that as consumers, we forget that. We forget that or even sometimes as marketers, it's like we're thinking the opposite. We only need to be in highly relevant environments. And that's not always the case.
Yeah. Like you should be. You don't want to not be there.
Right. Of course.
But if you think about how much time in a day we're spending online, right? It's like 12 hours in a day you're spending online. There's 12 hours a day that, I'm at work and I'm also in fantasy league. It's fine. Don't worry about it, boss. Right. We're spending that much time. Like it's about finding the right balance of not overdoing it, but being definitely being relevant, but also thinking about the full experience. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think just one more note on that is that like when you are just looking online, a lot of times we have banner blindness, right? But if you've seen a video or a CTV ad or heard an audio ad, then you see that banner, it's going to spark something you're going to remember. Oh, I saw that on Hulu last night. I saw that video CTV ad, and then you're going to see the banner. So So anyway, just important to be omni-channel.
No, I think that's absolutely right. You'll remember seeing the banner, or at least if not subconsciously, you remember seeing the brand, right? And
Right,
that's
exactly.
and that's the whole point, because as much as we want everybody to convert and be bottom funnel, it takes a lot to get attention whenever you're right. Part of why we started is that you're inundated with ads every day. I think it's like 10,000 ads that you might be seeing. So how do you be relevant and have, give the customer a good experience, the prospect, everything. This is a good transition as we think about audience strategy. So, a lot of what we do is, of course, account-based marketing, where we're going to target a set number of companies, or we're going to help develop an account-based marketing list, right? Here's all the companies with intent for cloud architecture or content marketing. And a lot of times, right, as we build these audience lists, I might want to also add in extra filters, right? So even though it makes sense to target, the whole company, because there's a huge number of people in a buying committee. If we, depending on budget, depending on goals, we might want to overlay different kinds of demographics and firmographics. So this is just an example of one of our dashboards that helps agencies and brands sort of understand what's the makeup of the personas within the account list. So this is just a view of folks within the marketing professional group. So it's like the department, right? So all the people that sort of work within marketing, from even like data scientists to sellers to what we imagine is the CMOs. And then sort of all the other filters you can apply, just so as we get to thinking about audience strategy. Of course, we think campaigns, what are we trying to achieve? What's the creative we want to leverage? And now I have to think about who actually, are we going to spend our money on right now? And so this is just a view to sort of help think about, how do you want to bring those together? How do you want to balance with how many people can we reach that have consent across these devices? And what else do we want to layer in to just really isolate who we want to reach? So I'm sure you could write books and books about this, but just give us a little take on what you think in terms of audience strategy.
Yeah, I think it is really important to think about the different segmentation of your audience. I think especially in tech, a lot of times we're just looking at IT decision makers, right? But the buying committee isn't just the folks in the IT department. It's also going to be the finance team, the perhaps the HR team, right? So we need to think about all of those different personas, and that they are also important to reach as well. So that is one of the things that we're always looking at. We're looking at what exactly makes up this audience. And then one of the cool things too is that we can actually target by professional group if we want to. So we have done that. And sometimes we actually see greater scale in our international markets with the professional group than we would with the actual job function. So that's definitely something, a little trick that we use. And then obviously company size, again, segmenting your creative or your messaging by company size, company revenue, and it can also be a good approach. And again, industry, we do for a lot of clients segment by industry in order to have unique messaging.
Yeah. The scale part that you touched on, I want to jump one more slide and drill in on that. I think a lot of customers, right, like you just said, they want to reach just the IT decision maker. And in reality, there's a whole buying committee and then there's a whole thing around like, what is identity online, right? How do you actually identify that person? And make sure, right, because the person that maybe filled out that final white paper that's like signaling they're about ready to buy, how many of those are the CTO or like a person on his staff that works for him and therefore would not meet the job threshold that we might apply, right? So that's why there's so much art, I think, to the science of audience strategies, because we know what we need to achieve and we have to balance it with how do we find these people online? How might they appear, right? How might they look? And take all of that together to make sure that, like, in the end, I'm going to get you what you want. But we can't, it's not as simple as like click this button now and and call it done.
Right. Right.
So what I bring up with this slide is actually the image actually just sort of isolates when you're looking at some of these different professional groups, right? So the IT professional versus the marketing professional, you'll see there's actually different scale of those audiences by platform. Just a handful of our exchanges that we work with. And it's not about any individual platform. It's just to acknowledge that wherever you're going to run, we'll have different amounts of identity, different amounts of people that you have consent that you can target. And so it's such a challenge. Would you mind speaking a little bit to that in terms of like how do you figure out how to find these people and where's the best place to engage with them?
Yeah, I mean, we tend here to work mostly with the trade desk on my team. And they do tend to have a pretty good match rate and a good strong approach to data. I mean, I also know that you all have been working with them on other things as well around identity. So we're pretty lucky that typically we are able to get pretty good scale, but that I'll tell you that IT decision maker can be really difficult to reach. And a lot of folks, are using ad blockers and things like that. So it can be really tricky to try to reach that persona. But we do our best, and I think that that our segments do really well. I mean, we see great performance against our Bombora segments for IT decision makers and IT professionals.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring up. No, go ahead. I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I'm glad you bring up the trade desk. We do have a direct integration with them as well as with the other platforms on this page. And we do have a quick plug for our intelligent ABM product that we just announced a partnership with them. But the trade desk is great because it's also leveraging future-proof identifiers, right? So when I say identifiers, it means like I can target, somebody can target Hsiaolei in a consented way without third-party cookies and sort of across device. So on my laptop and on my phone and maybe on my Hulu. And that's what makes some of these platforms great. And that's part of the opportunity and the challenge is you have to have these now because how quickly the world is changing in terms of like identity on the internet.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not to go all the way in the weeds, my last comment on this slide is I just want to call out that another thing that brands are thinking more about, and especially in regard to the changes in identity and what will be happening with third-party cookies, is a lot of brands are starting to think about their own first-party audience. So first-party audience means, the folks that come to your website or come to your landing page, maybe come to your sponsored section on a different website. Right, that can all be your first party audience that you can take and retarget and nurture. Right, it doesn't have to just be one retarget from some buying page. It can be more holistic than that, and they can still apply all the other sort of filters that we've already been talking about. Right, so everybody that came to my website that has intent for cloud architecture, and then filter for the IT decision makers. So they've read me. I can treat them as a first party audience. I can go re-engage with them, from search to programmatic to social, and I can still do the other parts of it. Are you seeing a similar thing in terms of like a lot of brands sort of figuring out a first party audience strategy too? Do you get to work with them on that?
Yeah, definitely. I think we're seeing more and more of that. I mean, in terms of retargeting is a tactic that I almost always want to employ, even if it's just retargeting my own impressions, just to make sure that I'm building that frequency with the user. We also, measure that full funnel impact across different channels. So we're able to track like what is the effect of programmatic on search, right? Because typically somebody is going to go to Google and search for the brand immediately rather than clicking on it. So yeah, we're definitely seeing a lot of interesting use cases with first-party data. I love the example that you brought up of it's almost like second-party data, right? Because you're taking your first-party data and then matching it to third-party data and creating a unique audience. I think that that's always a great approach. I think there is hesitancy from marketers to share their first-party data. Even at times, there's also hesitancy to put pixels on the client site. Like I know you all have the is it the audience verification pixel that I'm thinking of that actually goes on the client's site?
Yeah, we have a pixel for creative, for banner creative, like images, and we also have a website tag that
Yeah, the website
that works
tag
on
I've
sites.
always wanted to test. I think that could really bring the value of this data to life, right? With the client, we can show like, oh, this is what people are actually doing once they get to your site.
Yeah, we do have that deployed with quite a few brands, and what's great about that is that it's also future proof in that it doesn't require cookies. It can capture consented data from Safari and like other devices that are just not using it. So absolutely. But this is a great segue, and I want to be cognizant of time to go into our measurement section where, let's now see, what's the point of all this? How can we take all of this data strategy and the work that we're putting in the front end and bring it back to the KPIs that marketers are looking for? So up here is just sort of the list of sort of traditional key performance indicators that marketers leverage and sort of value in evaluating campaigns. And we're going to sort of go into sort of what else is new, what else to think about. But Rosey, do you have anything to add here in terms of metrics that you deploy a lot that your customers lean on?
Yeah, I think in general, we get a lot of clients who have been using click-through rates for years as their primary KPI. It's not really my favorite KPI. I think if you're optimizing in platform to a click-through rate, you could be optimizing towards fraud. So you're not really getting the true view. You're also not seeing view through, right? So you don't know how many people, and especially when you're looking at the tech industry, a lot of people aren't going to click on ads. So, you are missing out on a big chunk of that data if you're only focused on the click-through rate. So typically, if we have a client come in with that click-through rate as their primary KPI, we just try to educate them, teach them a little bit about just site landings and bounce rate and what can affect that. We also encourage, right, again, it's going to depend on what type of campaign it is, but we encourage engagement metrics in general, especially for that middle of the funnel, whereas reach and frequency is probably more for that top of the funnel. And then we also look at the number of accounts reached. So we do use that pixel that you put on the creative. And from there, we're able to see the accounts reached. And then as we go into the next slides, I'll show you a recent QBR that I did for a client and where we looked at the increase of topics researched.
Just want to comment for that click rate. I think you're exactly right, because I think the latest stats is that like 50% of ad clicks, the ones that even do click, are errant, right? They're like, get that box away from me.
That finger,
yeah. And that's what's so funny is like, just think about how you use the internet yourself. Like
right.
If you're not going to click on ads, why would the CMO or the CTO necessarily do that? And then just like that, like if you are familiar with, right, you maybe you didn't remember exactly where you saw the brand, but you're going to search for something that end up on the site. You probably got there because you were influenced by advertising, but again, you didn't click there, right? So view through is not a scary metric. That's totally logical with how all of us use the internet.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to jump to that QBR now if you want to keep going.
Yeah. So this was for a client. We did use the Bombora pixel at the creative level. And then, as I had mentioned previously, we like to sit down with the client. We send them all of the Bombora topics. We make sure that they choose the topics that are most important for them. And then the Bombora team loads those into our insights instance. And from there, we're able to pull in our data from our campaign and match it back to those topics. So in this example, in this campaign ran, the flight was a little over a month long, so not terribly long, but we saw a 20% increase on the topics that were associated with our campaign. So that was really strong. I think to date or through last week, we were at 32%. So the client was very pleased with that.
So just in layman's terms, this increase in topics, are we saying that this is basically the accounts that we're targeting, they're researching our solutions more, right? Because we handpick these topics that relate to my business, my products. And so the fact that they're showing more of this research means that, like, hey, maybe they're more down funnel, maybe they're further in pipeline, even though if I don't see it in a click, that's sort of what I'm associating with that. Okay, just want to make sure.
Yeah, we'd like to think, right? Like, oh, our campaign is doing its job. It's creating a buzz, and this buzz is causing people to go and research on these topics more.
Yeah, the definition of demand generation. We can actually prove it now, right? They're interested. There's demand growing. That's very cool.
Yeah,
I'm going to jump to.
It's very powerful data, especially for programmatic, because we don't always in programmatic get the attribution, right? So being able to leverage this data and show, look, our campaigns actually are doing something is amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And so here you have all the accounts reaching a campaign too. So is this typically what you provide to partners so they can actually see not just we reach this and here's your impressions and your, not your clicks for your engagement rate, but you also get this list of accounts.
Yeah, and you can see which topic they were, searching on. So
cool.
yeah, we give them this. This is exactly what I had included in the QBR. So.
Awesome. All right, let's go to your next slide.
Yeah, and then the client had also asked about creative, right? They said, hey, how's our creative doing? What can we change? So this was something that we shared with them. These are your top 5 topics by increase. These would be good topics for you to tailor your creative messaging towards. And then again, the opposite, maybe let's avoid these declining topics.
Right. So this strategy of like seeing who did we reach and what is their changes in research as a way to sort of measure demand and also inform what's the next thing, right? How do we keep engaging with them? What else is trending in terms of this very specific audience that we reached? So this tactic sounds like it's useful regardless of account-based marketing, right? For any kind of campaign, I want to know which creative I should be leveraging based on that segment I reached. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think using the Bombora pixel across an entire campaign is valuable because then you can see, everything.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. More data.
More data.
More data informed activation, the better.
Absolutely.
I want to jump to, was there anything else on the slide? Okay. I want to jump to one more thing that I think, oh, I missed it. There it is. One more thing that I think marketers can leverage once you get these nice reports from your agency, when Just Global tells you, okay, here's the impact we made, and here's your account list that saw the ad, right, with the topics. We need to connect that dot as marketers. The world of sales and marketing, we all know it should be aligned, right? And we're trying to make it aligned. That's why we try to think about what's the impact on pipeline. That's why we try to generate leads, right? Because we know that that's a thing I can give to the seller. I feel like this is something, and more of our brands are doing this, where they're actually taking this as the thing to give back to sales enablement, to say, we don't just have to give you leads. You already know who these accounts are, right? This is perhaps our target account list. And so this is now telling you who you should go prioritize, right? So when the SDR team is making calls, they don't have to just make calls based off of, alpha order, or we got a lead list, but we have these campaigns targeting prospects right now. We just got this reach in the last week or month. This is probably who will be top of mind. This is who will probably answer your call because they just saw your ads. And if you want to know what to call them about, you have the topic too.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that our brands can see, and the marketers can see how valuable these reports really are, to go beyond just telling your boss we did it, we got good ROI, but here's what's next. What do you think, Rosey?
Yeah, I think it's brilliant. I mean, you're first of all, you're giving them a warmer list, and not just that, you're giving them something to talk about with the customer, the potential customer. So, they can lead with that topic. As a salesperson, I feel like that's like somebody's doing your homework for you, just giving it to you so you can turn it. So,
and just like so on one hand, as a marketer, I might think, well, this is too much. They're not going to go call 1,000, but at least with those topics, I can group them together because I did choose the topics and then just do some sequencing. So I only have to really think about maybe 2 or 3 messages to sort of engage that list on. So it's really can be a one-to-one. You'll give the 500 to the sellers, or take the 1,000 accounts that were engaged and segment it just based off of the 2 or 3 sequences, and you're basically doing the retargeting that Just Global will do for you, but also in your email.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's really smart.
Well, I think we're exactly actually at time. Thank you so much for doing this. Just to sort of summarize and wrap up, we talked about sort of how we can leverage data to run the full spectrum of advertising. It's not just create ad, serve ad, measure ad. It's how do we use data to inform creating the campaign, and who we should target, how we should segment. So leveraging data for creative, for content, think about that nurture, that user journey. How many times we really need to hit them before they'll start to remember, and then how do we actually reach them? How can we reach them sort of across the whole as somebody's as a business professional that I also watches Hulu, right? It's not consumers or business professionals, we're all one. And so how do you find that audience? How do you engage them in the right way? And then of course, how do we actually measure in a cookieless world, but also in today's world where we can go a lot farther than clicks, and sort of leverage the best data. So I think that's sort of the primary bullets that we hit. Was there anything else, Rosey, that you'd want to add to that summary?
No, I think that it's just really important to look at data and to do as much research as you can ahead of time. And that research is just going to help you later, right? And then continuing to look at the data as your campaign, continues, and to be willing to make adjustments, right?
Yeah.
And to just think strategically always about how you can be using the data, and also how you can tell the right story to the client, right? Because sometimes there's not even a strong story there, but you just have to kind of keep digging, right? And pull different reports. And that's what I love about the Bombora Insights tool. I can pull 10 different reports. They all tell me something slightly different, but it helps me really craft that story to the client and prove out the value.
Yeah, I mean, we know the capabilities of technology, right, in the universe, and but it's difficult to change the way you work, and to truly transform every business process. But especially in an economy that may be uncertain, right, where we know that we need to justify, because we should be justifying every dollar that's spent, you know, this B2B data set can be just so powerful in doing so. So yeah, so I love what you just said. There's so many ways you can sort of cut and go deeper, which means that you can also start high level and then,
Right.
you know, get to that advanced stage whenever you're ready. But the important thing is just to get started. Like, you have to start using this kind of data, because again, the world around us is so changed. Um,
I think we got very used to not being able to measure so much
mhm,
that, you know, now it's, for me personally, it's just the amount of data that I can look at has grown exponentially,
mhm.
but it keeps it so interesting, you
Yeah,
know?
there will always be work ahead in terms of learning, I think. So we won't be out of work by
No.
anytime soon. Awesome. Well, thank you so much again for joining
Yeah,
today.
thanks for
And thank you
having me.
everybody for joining us. Rosie, you were fantastic.